Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to this new edition of Business Africa. I am Dayoka, the top stories. Many African heads of state and government traveled to Riyadh for the first Saudi-African summit. The Democratic Republic of Congo and its neighbor Angola looked for ways to strengthen their trade cooperation during the second DRC-Angola Economic Forum. Finally, as COP28 is fast approaching, environmental experts are wondering whether oil companies are truly committed to a transition to green energy. Just like France, Russia or the United States, Saudi Arabia has invited Africa to its table. In Riyadh, the Saudi Public Investment Fund announced plans to invest $533 million in Africa.
What future for cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Africa? Riyadh held its first ever summit with African countries in the capital last week, with several heads of state accepting the invitation by King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Organised under the rather generic theme of development and prosperity, the meeting reaffirmed the kingdom's desire to extend its economic and diplomatic presence on the continent. On the first day of the event, the Saudi Fund for Development announced significant investments. The finance minister said the kingdom will be releasing $533 million for projects in 12 African countries. It appears that Saudi Arabia, a new member of the BRICS grouping of emerging market countries, is continuing to extend its influence on the African continent. But this time, it seems like it wants to do more than just resolve conflicts, as it did recently in Sudan. Loan agreements in the health sector have been signed with Guinea, Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone and Burundi. And it's discussed road infrastructure projects with Malawi and Tanzania. Riyadh is planning to diversify its investments and thus its oil-dependent economy, while taking advantage of the opportunities offered by the economic and demographic boom expected in Africa. But at what price for the African continent?
What does the future hold for cooperation between the Saudi Kingdom and Africa? To answer this question, I am joined by Hichem Lemisi. He is an international strategy analyst and the secretary of GPRI. Welcome to Business Africa. Relations between Saudi Arabia and the African continent are not new, so why is this summit taking place now?
Saudi Arabia is a rising geopolitical power that is gaining enormous influence, and Africa is a particularly promising continent. What we need to understand is that Africa has both the highest population growth in the world and the world's least exploited energy resources and raw materials. And at the same time, you have the lowest agricultural productivity. The infrastructure and equipment available to the population are poor. As a result, the growth drivers and growth opportunities in Africa are actually phenomenal. And the Saudis have understood this very well, particularly as the Saudis have seen in recent years through American retaliatory measures, such as the extraterritoriality of American laws, that at any moment the investment you could make abroad could be frozen and confiscated, as well as your assets. This is what happened with Russian assets, which were frozen by the Americans to the tune of over $300 billion. This has made the Saudis think that they are now looking to diversify their investments.
Is it possible, or can we imagine that Saudi Arabia will turn Africa into some sort of new investment hub?
According to official statements, Saudi Arabia has pledged between $25 and $30 billion of investments between now and 2030. When you look at these investments, they are already part of a strategy that has been put in place. Like Saudi private operators have already started to invest in Africa, particularly in East Africa, and now they are increasingly turning their attention to the strategic metals or strategic material sectors, like materials such as the rare earths that are contributing to the new industrial revolutions based on new technologies known as green technologies. This implies that there is, in fact, a strategic vision that is no longer found in Europe, for example, in the Gulf states, there's really a very advanced, very powerful strategic vision with a very long-term view, and Africa is actually a stakeholder in this vision. Today, Saudi Arabia wants to keep this religious soft power, but they are trying to add a more cultural and more economic dimension. There is, for example, a Saudi presence in the mining sector in Namibia, and they're also looking to expand into other countries such as Nigeria. Things aren't necessarily set in stone yet, but we can imagine a rather special partnership between Nigeria and even Saudi Arabia.
Apart from winning a new creditor, what else can African states gain?
What I will say is that there is one extremely positive element for African states in relations with Saudi Arabia, and that is that Saudi Arabia has a different conception of economic relations. In other words, if they invest in Africa, it's obviously to benefit from it. But compared to other countries such as the industrialized countries of the North or the post-industrialized countries of Europe and the United States or even China, Saudi Arabia, apart from hydrocarbons at the moment, has nothing to sell to Africa, which means that when they invest in Africa, they are investing in countries that the spin-offs from these countries will inevitably be positive or at least shared. Of course, Saudi Arabia currently has a very ambitious industrialization plan and obviously sees Africa as a potential long-term customer. And in the meantime, the investment that may be made in African countries will have a stronger positive impact on the countries and their populations.
Hisham Lemesi, thank you for your insight.
You are welcome.
More than 300 entrepreneurs took part in the second economic forum between Kinshasa and Luanda. The aim was to boost trade between the two countries and build a multifaceted cooperation.
Angola's President, João Lourenço, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC's President, Félix Tshisekedi, have held the second Angola-DRC Economic Forum in Luanda. The forum, which ran over the course of 2 days, highlighted the strengthening of multifaceted cooperation between the two countries. Over 300 entrepreneurs took part in the conference, whose theme was Economic Partnerships for Mutual Growth. The Deputy Angolan Minister for the Economy and Planning described it a fruitful partnership between this country and the DRC. Last year, we exported around $244 million and we imported at least $22 million from the DRC. So we can see that there's a positive balance here, and that's good for Angola. During the forum, the two parties expressed their shared interest in deepening and energizing their relationship for the benefit of the development of their respective private sectors. For Vital Kamerhe, the Congolese Minister for the Economy, the second edition of the forum was an opportunity to strengthen cooperation in a variety of fields. We've explored a number of sectors, including agriculture, energy, tourism, transport and security, as well as our shared borders. The Democratic Republic of Congo has the longest border with neighboring countries, with a neighboring country at 2,500 kilometers. The authorities of both countries say they are committed to harmonizing the rights of movement of goods and people, as well as reducing administrative taxes at border crossings to facilitate trade.
In less than a month, COP28 will kick off in Dubai. The climate summit will this year be chaired by the head of an oil company. That should revive debates on fossil fuels.
The United Arab Emirates, host of COP28, has appointed Sultan Al Jaber, chairman of the national oil company, to chair the next climate summit. A choice that has drawn a plethora of criticism, especially as the main objective of COP27 in Egypt was to reduce the use of fossil fuels such as oil and gas. In response to challenges to their presence during negotiations, the oil companies claim that they too are committed to the energy transition. But this argument lacks in substance to convince experts, which have clearly stated that very few companies have proper sustainability plans.
After looking closely at all the oil companies that attended last year's conference, We came to the conclusion that for the most part, they don't have large energy transition plans.
At a time when the urgency of climate change is putting pressure on oil and gas corporations, some African companies stress the importance of fossil fuels. While African countries are bearing the brunt of climate change, oil and gas are essential to their national economies. Organizations such as the Uganda National Petroleum Company have therefore opted to use clean energy to decarbonize their fossil fuel projects rather than replace them.
That wraps up this episode of Business Africa. You can watch it again on Africanews.com and on all our platforms. I'll see you soon.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.